Hello and a very good day. Thank you so much for joining in on today's webinar. This is going to be the cybersecurity webinar series, where this is going to be a 3-day series where we will look through various aspects of an IT network, various components that need to be secured in an IT network, how the native tools, the native auditing tools, they don't help that much, and how Manage Engine can help you bridge that gap. Right now, before I go ahead and jump in on today's topic and today's agenda, and before I tell you what we are going to cover today and the next 2 days, I would like to run a quick audio and a video check because we're all working from home. I'm using my home internet, and I wanted to make sure that everybody out here today are able to hear me well and are able to see the screen well. So if my voice is well and audible without any distortion or without any breakage in the audio, can you give me a confirmation using the Q&A tab, please? Just say yes, just say okay, just say great, so I can confirm that my voice is reaching to you well and clear. Thank you so much for your responses, guys. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Abdul, for joining in. Looks like everything is okay, and I hope you can see the title as well, meaning the video. At any point in time during the course of the webinar, if you have any issues with the audio video, or if you feel the audio is lagging with the video, please do let me know, and I'll do my best to get that fixed from my end. Now, before we go ahead and jump in, I would like to tell you that the entire session that's happening today, that's happening tomorrow, and that's happening day after are all going to be recorded. And on day 3, on the final session, we will be giving you a YouTube link, a playlist of all the recordings. That's today's recording, tomorrow's, and day after, right? So at any point in time during the course of today's webinar, if you have any questions, if you face any audio video issues, or if there's anything on your mind that you'd like to ask me, please put through that message in the Q&A tab and using the Q&A tab alone, because sometimes messages do get lost when you put them through the chat window. So if there's anything important that you'd like to ask me, any question, any query on your mind, please do ensure you put that through the Q&A tab. And yes, I will ensure the recordings and the slide deck will reach to you very soon on your email addresses as soon as they are converted by our team. All right. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump in and let's begin. Today is day 1, and today we will be looking into Active Directory and Azure security. Right. So why are we picking Active Directory and Azure security? And what are we going to cover tomorrow? What are we going to cover day after? Let me quickly show you something right here. If I minimize this, and if I take you to the webinar landing page, right, this is probably the place where you've registered for the webinar. And if you take a look at the agenda, these are the agendas for day 1, that's today, day 2, that's tomorrow, day 3, that's day after. Right. So if you take a look at the agenda, you will notice that we are focusing on Active Directory, and not just Active Directory, but Azure AD as well. Right. So in short, the focus of this cybersecurity series will not just be on your on-premises environment, but will also be on your cloud services, public cloud services, namely Azure Active Directory. Right. So today, day 1, we'll take a look at various aspects of AD and Azure AD security and various areas that you need to secure, how the native tools don't do that much, and how Manage Engine Log 360 can help. Tomorrow will be a crisp session where we will be looking into 10 must audit events in Azure in AD. If not audited properly, or if not caught in time, could lead to a full-scale security breach. That's going to be tomorrow's agenda. And on day 3, we will take a look at Windows security, right? Because 80% of our networks are generally Windows systems. And not to worry, we will take a look at Windows security on day 3, but we will also delve into a little bit of Linux system security as well. Right. So this is going to be the agenda, day 1, day 2, and day 3. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Right. So, like I said, the focus is on hybrid Active Directory, that's on-premise and cloud. And the reason we decided to do that this time is because cloud adoption is accelerating. If you take a look at the illustrations on the right side of your screen, depending on how you're facing your computer, you will notice that there is an increased cloud adoption from the advent of COVID-19. Not just enterprises, but small, medium businesses. Even the smaller businesses are looking towards the cloud. Public cloud services, namely AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, are being widely adopted by enterprises. And if you take a look at the graph, you will notice that AWS is the most adopted cloud service, but it is predicted that Azure is quickly going to cover the gap with AWS and become the most adopted cloud service in 2021. Right? So that's the reason we chose to cover Active Directory and Azure Active Directory security in general for all of these sessions that are happening today and the next 2 days. And if you'd like me to cover any other cloud infrastructure like AWS or Google Cloud for that matter, please do let me know, and I will do my best to plan a separate webinar just for cloud security for you all very soon. All right. So yes, this is how the infrastructure of most organizations look like. If you already have Azure Active Directory, this is how your infrastructure will look like. You have an on-premises AD infrastructure. There is an Azure AD Connect server, which syncs your on-premise identities, resources to the cloud, right? So if you already have Azure, or if you're thinking about adopting Azure, this would be the configuration of your environment. Right? So the reason the focus of today's webinar and for the next two webinars will be on misconfigurations, right? Because, well, everything is good, right? You have your on-premises Active Directory infrastructure, you are thinking, or you've already adopted public cloud services like Azure AD, you are leveraging the benefits of a cloud service. And while all of that is fine and dandy, it's important to understand and realize that misconfigurations are still a top cause for breaches, right? Misconfigurations either are the root cause for breaches or are at least the promoting factors for most security breaches. GoDaddy, the web hosting site, was subject to a security breach where an unauthorized third party was granted access to login credentials and more than 24,000 employee records were compromised. Companies Honda and Cognizant were subject to a ransomware attack, namely the Snake ransomware attack. And this happened because an end user's remote desktop credentials were exposed or leaked. An attacker got hold of these credentials, and within very little time, the attacker was able to launch a targeted ransomware attack. Now, the reason I call the ransomware attack targeted was because the attacker already had access to an internal user's credentials in the organization. You would have heard of FireEye. FireEye is the cybersecurity firm that looks into ransomware attacks, that looks into security incidents across the globe, and builds tools to detect such security incidents for blue teams in most IT organizations. And FireEye was also subject to a breach where an unauthorized user gained access to their networks, and the unauthorized user stole the company's hacking tools, right? So FireEye is a cybersecurity firm. Now, thankfully, the hacking tools were not used in any of the attacks later on, but this attack alone shows the capabilities of hackers around the globe, right? Hackers typically wait for a misconfiguration, a simple administration mishap that happens in your network, on an endpoint, on a user account. And once they find the misconfiguration or the mishap, it is only a matter of time before they dig their claws into the deepest parts of your network, right? So what are security misconfigurations, and why are we focusing on misconfigurations after all? The reason we decided to focus on misconfigurations today and for the next 2 days is because misconfigurations pave the way for a security breach. Now, misconfigurations could be your default configurations on your network that haven't been changed in a long time. For example, your local administrator passwords, right? This is a classic example of a default configuration that is not changed in many organizations. It could be unmonitored default configurations. For example, your system files and folders that only administrators have access to. So these system files and folders are typically unmonitored in most organizations, which again is a security risk. Misconfigurations could be permissions assigned to end users. for temporary purposes or due to a process error. But the end result is that these permissions were not revoked or were not ungranted for these users. And last but not the least, misconfigurations could also be weaknesses with the platforms, unpatched bugs with your Active Directory, your Azure, or your Windows platforms in general that could lead to a security incident. Right? So your unchanged or unmonitored configurations, your permissions that are granted to users but have not been revoked or have not been ungranted in a long time, and the unfixed bugs on the platforms that haven't been fixed by Microsoft themselves could also be a security misconfiguration, which could be the core reason behind a security breach, or at the very least, a propagating factor. Right? So without further ado, let's take a look at various ways misconfigurations on networks could lead to security breaches. And we are going to start off with Active Directory. Now, the reason I chose to speak about Active Directory is because most infrastructures are built on Microsoft native or on-premise Active Directory. Right? If you take a look at the diagram on your left or the illustration on your left, you will notice that this is the scenario in most organizations. Most of your data is still on premises. Your workstations, your member servers, your user accounts are all still managed on premises. Your group policies or your security policies are still governed on premises. And in some cases, single sign-on to cloud applications like Azure or Office 365 is also set up on premises. For example, ADFS or Federation Services. Right? So the cloud element is just a newest addition. So the cloud has been gaining popularity from the last 1 year or from the last 2 years. But the truth is, while it's important that we secure the cloud, it is important that we secure on-premise Active Directory as well, because on-premise AD is the foundation of most IT networks. Right? So how do we secure Active Directory? The role of any IAM service, be it Azure or AD, is authentication and authorization. And I thought it's best that we split security into these two aspects. When we speak about authentication, the first thing that comes to mind is logons. When we speak about authorization, the first thing that comes to mind is the permissions that users have to perform activities on the domain. What are the users authorized to do, right? And when we speak about logons, we got to talk about passwords, right? Because logons are the first line of defense. Logons are the easiest way attackers can gain access to your network. And let me show you a quick experiment as to how Active Directory passwords can easily be compromised. So if I open up my VM, you can see I have run a few commands here. So I basically run a command to get the Active Directory default domain password policy. Now I know what the minimum password length should be. I know what the lockout threshold is, so I can plan my password attack very, very carefully so as to not lock out any account and not raise any alarms or red flags within the organization. And next, I've gotten the members of the administrators group. So I know what the length of the password must be. I know what's the safe limit for me to perform the attack. And I know who the members of the administrators group are. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is called reconnaissance or domain surveillance. Any end user, even your non-privileged users, can simply log on to the domain, run these commands, and then gain Active Directory related information. The same could happen for Azure as well, which we will cover in the upcoming sessions. Right? The important thing to note here is a non-privileged user can also query information from Active Directory because, well, that's how Active Directory is designed. Every user has read access on every aspect of Active Directory. So a user with the right commands or with the help of Google could get critical Active Directory information. Now that we have the information, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to scroll down and I will run a command called import module /domain password spray.ps1, right? The module is imported. And what have we imported here? I have a simple, let me quickly minimize this, close this up. I have a simple PowerShell script on my desktop, right? Just a piece of code. Let me show you what the script does. If I run a command called invoke domain password spray, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give in a password. Let's just say password at 123, a very predictable password, but still widely used in most organizations. So once I hit enter and once I confirm, here's what's going to happen. Within a few seconds, I have usernames and their passwords, right? Now, the important thing to note here is that an end user with no privileges at all can simply log on to his or her endpoint, query for critical information like members of groups or the password policies, and launch a full-blown password spray attack on Active Directory environments. This is how easy it is to compromise Active Directory passwords. Now, how do we detect such activities on your domain? The first thing that springs to mind to all the security geeks out there is the event viewer, right? Once you enable auditing on your domain, all the events will be pushed onto the security tab of the event viewer, which you can then use to notice anything malicious or sensitive or suspicious happening on your domain. Now, as you can see, I've already filtered these logs with event ID 4624, which happens to be a logon event ID. And you can notice that there are close to 8,000 events here. 8,000 logon events. And how can I, as an admin or a help desk, figure out malicious logons from all of these logons on my domain? And this is just a test machine. Imagine the number of logon events when it comes to an enterprise domain controller or a member server, right? The problem complicates even further. It's not just the number of events, it's the different types of events. So your domain controllers record different logon events. Your member servers record different logon events. A local logon records a different event. A remote logon records a different event. And the different numbers, different logon events, and the high volume of logon events makes it very, very difficult to truly understand why an event was audited in the first place. And unfortunately, this is the case for most security auditing features in the native tools. There are a lot of events thrown, and it's impossible for you, and it's very impractical for you to comb through, to pass through all of these events and truly understand what's happening. The second biggest problem is that these events, they are not categorized in a human readable format. As you can see, this is a cluttered mess of events. This is not easy to understand from just a single glance. And last but not the least, if you are unable to comb through so many events, if you do not have sufficient features to filter or search through the events, how could you decode the actual reason, or how could you understand the actual reason behind an audited event? Right? That is when AD Audit Plus, a component of Manage Engine Log 360, comes into the picture. Now, Log 360 is our integrated SIM solution. It helps you with a lot of things. For example, AD auditing, Azure auditing. If cloud auditing is more of your forte, Log 360 helps you with that as well. If Office 365 or Exchange auditing is more of your forte, Log 360 can help you with that as well. And now we'll take a look at the AD Audit Plus component of Log 360. So here I've opened that up on a separate tab. And if I head into reports and Active Directory, do you see this called user logon reports? If I click on log on failures, let me log back in again. So this is AD Audit Plus, a component of Log 360, like I said. And once I log in to AD Audit Plus, and if I select the reports tab, and if I select Active Directory right here, and the logon failures report, this report will give you insights on all the logon failures on your domain, right? So you know which user has caused a logon failure across which server and what was the time. The time is crucial for you to determine if it was a genuine logon failure or an automated password attack, like the password spray attack that we just performed, right? So this is where Log 360 bridges the gap for you, because Log 360 takes all of these events, the events that you see in the event viewer, and segregates them into reports that are easy to read and easy to understand. And these reports are completely searchable. So you could go back in time. You could search based on a username. You could search based on a host name. You could search based on an event type, whether it's a failure or a success. If you have multiple domain controllers, you can monitor logons across those domain controllers as well. If you have member servers, you can monitor logons across them. You can monitor logons across your workstations. Now that we're all working remotely, we can monitor logons across RDP or remote desktop services if you have a network policy server implemented, or if you have a remote desktop gateway implemented, we can monitor logons across these services as well, right? So in short, logons across every mode can be monitored with AD Audit Plus, a component of Log 360. And all of these logons can be alerted upon as well. So if I head into the configuration tab, and if I choose, oops, okay, let me quickly head into the configuration tab. And if I choose create alert profile, you can create an alert for such logon failures. For example, if there are more than 10 logon failures occurring in under a minute, then throw me an alert. Right? If there are logon failures occurring outside of business hours, then throw me an alert. If there are logon failures occurring and the failure is from an admin group or a privileged group, then throw me an alert. You can set up an alert where an admin is alerted via email and via SMS as well. Right? So that's where Log 360 bridges the gap. It takes the events, it segregates them, it lets you search through those events, and it lets you set up alerts. Now that we're talking about AD and Azure together, it's important to look into the authentication mechanisms in Active Directory and in Azure. Right? So when you configure Azure, you will deploy Azure AD Connect on one of the servers in your environment. And when you deploy Azure AD Connect on one of the servers in the environment, and especially this is what most organizations do, they configure Azure using Express settings, right? And when you configure Azure using Express settings, this is what you get. You configure the passwords to be synced to Azure via pass hash synchronization. So I don't want to complicate this further. Just know that when you configure Azure AD Connect, your users are synced to Azure, right? And your passwords are synced to Azure as well using pass hash synchronization. And the account responsible for syncing passwords to Azure is your MSOL account. This is your Azure connector account that is used to sync passwords to your Azure instance from your Active Directory instance. Right? The important takeaway from this message here is that attackers often target this account. They try and extract the passwords of the account. And once attackers have access to the passwords of the account, it's only a matter of time before the attacker gains access to the password hashes of other Active Directory users. Now, how could this happen? This account, the MSOL account, used to send passwords from AD to Azure, has privileges, namely the replicating directory privileges that can be leveraged to gain password hashes of other AD users. Right? The reason I'm showing you this attack is just to show you that not any authentication mechanism is that safe. It could be pass the hash. It could be pass through authentication, or you may even have a federation service like Active Directory Federation Service. No matter what you use, they can be broken into. That's where Log 360 can help, because Log 360 can monitor logons across servers where Azure AD Connect is hosted. Right? So if there are any malicious user logging onto the server, then it's something worth noting, because the user may try to extract passwords of the MSOL account. Right? You can also detect PowerShell scripts and commands that could have been executed by an end user or on a server that could be password extraction attempts for the MSOL account. Right? So if I minimize this, head into AD Audit Plus and jump into Server Audit, scroll all the way down. Do you see this option called PowerShell Auditing? So whenever there are scripts that are executed by your users, right? It could be intentional. It could be a malicious script like a password spray script, or a script to extract the credentials of any account like the MSOL account we were talking about. You can note the scripts and the name of the user who's executing those scripts. You can read into the function blocks, or you can read into the code of the scripts as well to truly understand what the script does. You can also note commands, individual commands invoked by your users on your command line shells like PowerShell or any other shell. So here you go. This is PowerShell auditing. So any command that my end users execute will be recorded by AD Audit Plus, and all of these can be configured into alerts as well, right? So PowerShell auditing is an important feature because most attacks are script-based and we let you detect such attacks as well, right? So that basically ends authentication. We saw how easy it is to compromise AD passwords. We saw how the event viewer does not do much. And then we saw how AD Audit Plus bridges the gap. Then we saw that passwords that have to be synced from AD to Azure or any other mechanism that you use to configure authentication in AD and Azure environments, those authentication mechanisms can be broken into as well. And Log360 can help you detect such attack attempts on any of the authentication mechanisms, right? The next function of any IAM service, like I said, is authorization. Now we've looked into authentication. We've seen how passwords can be broken into, and we've seen how Log360 can help. But authorization is where users are assigned permissions on the domain. And this is where most misconfigurations happen because users almost always have permissions that they are not supposed to have, which is what causes breaches, right? So the role of a domain controller in Active Directory itself can be disguised. You can create a rogue domain controller in Active Directory. Let me show you a simple example right here. If I open up my browser, and here you have an attack that I uploaded on our channel. You can take a look at it whenever you want to, but this is how the attack would work, right? So I'm running Mimikatz on my system. Now you might argue saying, hey, Mimikatz is detected by antiviruses, so Mimikatz is not really a viable solution. But my argument to that is that it's just code. And most antiviruses have string-based detection. So if I change code within Mimikatz, and if I even rename Mimikatz to something else, then detecting Mimikatz would actually become difficult in any IT environment, right? So it's code, it can be re-engineered, it can be redesigned, and it is still possible to run Mimikatz, right? So once Mimikatz is run, here's what I'm going to do. I will run a command to basically launch a shell under the local administrator's token or the local administrator's account, right? And here's what I'm going to do. I am trying to inject changes to a user whose name is normal, and the change I'm trying to inject happens to be an attribute value, namely the description attribute, and the value I'm trying to inject is I was here, right? So here's what's happening here. This is my endpoint machine. I have configured this endpoint machine. I have promoted this endpoint machine temporarily as a rogue domain controller in order to inject changes into Active Directory, right? So here's what's going to happen. Within a few seconds, right? If I head back and if I push the changes, take a look at this. This is the registration of the endpoint, right? The endpoint is registered as a domain controller. The changes have been pushed. Once the changes are being done, the registration is again, the endpoint is unregistered as a domain controller. So what we've essentially done here is we've basically injected changes into an object in Active Directory by registering a client machine as a temporary domain controller. Here's the description attribute that we try to inject. You could create other users. You could give users secret group memberships. The choice is up to you, but it is possible for an attacker with sufficient knowledge to inject backdoor changes into AD by registering a rogue domain controller. Right? Now, how do you detect this attack? How do you stop this attack from happening? Now, the root cause of this attack, the reason behind this attack is because of a single misconfiguration on the domain. Right? Do you remember I started this webinar by saying misconfigurations lead to breaches, right? So if I open up my ADUC console, this is my domain. I right click on it. I head into properties, and then I head into security, and every one object is selected here. And if I scroll down, do you see this? Replicating directory changes. Now, everyone on my domain has replicating directory changes, right? Now, where did we last see this? We saw these permissions in the authentication attack as well, right? Do you remember the MSL account also had replicating directory changes permission? Now, what does this permission do? This permission is essentially used by domain controllers to update each other of the changes. So let's say there's DC1, let's say there's DC2, and DC1 wants to update DC2 of certain changes. It leverages an account with replicating directory changes privileges or permissions, right? In this case, there was a misconfiguration where everyone on the domain had these privileges. And this is how an end user could simply log on, register a rogue DC, register a client machine as a rogue DC, and inject backdoor changes into AD. This is the root cause for the rogue domain controller attack that we looked into, right? Which brings me to my next point, that is explicit permissions on AD configurations and objects. Now, the permission that you see right here is an explicit permission that was given to the everyone security principle, but any group, any user could have been given explicit permissions on the domain. If I scroll further down, do you see these? Called write domain password and lockout policies. Any user with this privilege will be able to modify your domain lockout policies. Right? So this is my next point. This is how explicit permissions on an Active Directory domain could lead to a security breach. And explicit permissions can be in many ways. For example, you can set explicit permissions on an organizational unit. Same way, properties, security, and this is how explicit permissions are assigned. Right? You could set explicit permissions on your computers. You could set explicit permissions on your groups, on your organization unit as well, right? And do you know this? Do you remember this? I mean, this is the delegation wizard, right? So whenever you right click on any OU and you say delegate control, this is how you delegate certain privileges to your end users to manage things on an Active Directory domain, right? And when you delegate certain privileges to your users, let's say I select my user Jen, and I want my user Jen to create, delete, and manage user accounts, right? And when I do this, what happens is that, again, the security descriptor of the object will be modified. So whether you assign permissions explicitly or you use the delegation control wizard, this is how explicit permission changes in AD could lead to a security incident. Right? You will have to monitor every explicit permission assigned on your objects. It could be by a help desk technician. It could be by another administrator or a junior administrator. Now, if you open up the @C edit tool, this is my domain configuration partition. So I've got my schema, I've got my configuration partition, and here as well, you can assign explicit permissions to users. For example, if I give my users permissions on the sites container, he or she could create new sites or delete new sites or modify sites. If I give my user permissions in the services container, he or she could modify services or create new services. He or she could also create new attributes or modify existing attributes on a domain level, right? So that's why I say monitoring explicit permissions on the domain is the need of the hour. And unfortunately, we know how the event viewer works. We know it's not great for you to pass through, for you to comb through and understand any permission changes. So this is where AD Audit Plus helps you with it, right? So if I head into AD Audit Plus, reports, and scroll down, you will see something called permission changes, where you will be able to monitor permission changes on all your objects. These are your explicit permission changes on your domain, right? And not just your objects, we monitor your configuration as well. So whenever there are schema permission changes, whenever there are permission changes on your domain partitions, we monitor those as well, and we generate alerts whenever there is a sensitive permission change that's not really supposed to happen. Right? Now, if you choose to depend on the native logs, let me just tell you that explicit permission changes are recorded in a very difficult to read format. They're not recorded in a human readable format. So if you choose to depend on the native logs, it's again not that easy for you to understand what the permission change is, even if you find the right log or the right audited event right? So the next thing I want to talk about was your group memberships in Active Directory. Now, how could group memberships in Active Directory go bad? How could group memberships in Active Directory be misconfigured? Let me show you a simple example right here. If I open up my browser, head into an example that I have right here. Right? So here's what's going to happen. I have a script. It's called Power Up. Many of you people who work with PowerShell would have seen the script already. And here's what the script does, right? So I'm logged in as a user called Ross. And once I run a command called invoke all checks, what the script does is it basically checks for any privileges that Ross may have on the domain that we could potentially escalate, right? Now it checks for unattended install files, it checks for any potential DLLs, it checks for registry paths, it checks for services on which ROS may have certain privileges, and it tells you if ROS has privileges on the domain that could be escalated or not, right? Now take a look at this option. Always install elevated is enabled on this machine. What is this? I will talk about it really shortly, but let's finish the attack. Right? So I'm going to run a command called write user add MSI. And do you see this? This is a Windows installer application, right? And what does the application do? The application is used to add a backdoor user into any Active Directory group, right? That's right. Any Active Directory group, you could simply create a backdoor user and make a membership change or inject a backdoor entry. So if I head into the administrators group and check, you will notice that my backdoor user is added to the administrators group, and all of this happened because of a simple MSI application that an end user executed. Right now, how could this happen? How could an end user simply execute an application and add a backdoor user to an Active Directory group? Something is wrong here, right? I will tell you the answer to this in the next few seconds. But in the meantime, if you have any ideas as to how this could have happened, please let me know using the Q&A tab, and let's see if any of you got it right. Right. So let's head into various other ways Active Directory groups can be misconfigured. The first way Active Directory groups can be misconfigured is via nested memberships. Right. The thing that most organizations don't note are circular memberships or nested memberships. More often than not, there is a group nested into another group that has privileges that it is not really supposed to have. This is an example, right? Admin group has access to the data, but there is a group nested in the admin group that also has access to this data, but this group is seldom monitored for memberships, right? You've got your default domain groups, like your enterprise admins, your domain admins group that must also be looked into for membership changes. You've got your groups that have access to privileged objects, privileged servers, and privileged files or folders and data. You'll have to monitor those memberships in real time as well. And not to forget, you have to check the nested memberships for these groups as well, right? And do you, if you have any other third-party service, for example, an on-premises Exchange server, there are certain groups that also give your users certain privileges that they're not really supposed to have. For example, if you have an on-premises Exchange server, if you note this group called the Exchange Windows Permissions group, right? This group, any user who's a member of this group, by default, has write privileges on the domain node, right? So any user who's a member of the Exchange Windows permission group can modify the permissions on a domain level. He could assign himself replicating privileges. He could assign himself or herself or any other user the permission to modify domain password and lockout policies. Right? So group misconfigurations. Monitor your default groups, monitor your privileged groups that have access to privileged servers and files and folders, monitor your cross-platform group memberships like other groups that may give your users certain privileges that they're not supposed to have. And if you have multiple domain controllers, monitor group memberships across your domain controllers as well. Right? And this is how one misconfiguration could lead to another misconfiguration and eventually an attack. So any user who's a member of this group could potentially assign himself replicating directory changes. And with that, the user could launch a DC shadow attack or a rogue domain controller attack on the domain. Right? The problem with auditing group membership changes is that there are a number of auditing events. For example, a security group, when created, records a separate audit event. A security group, when deleted, records a separate audit event. When a member is added, when a member is removed, when a group attribute is changed, separate audit events are recorded based on the type and scope of groups. Right? So this is where Log 360 can fill the gap, where AD Audit Plus can monitor your group membership changes in real time. So whenever members are added to groups, whenever members are removed from groups, all of those membership changes will be audited and the respective users will be alerted as well, right? By, well, configuring the alerts by creating alert profiles for the reports that you see right here, right? The next important thing before we look into any more use cases is to understand alerting and how the AD environment doesn't work that well with alerting, right? So if you open up your event viewer and if you, let's say, right click on an event and then you do attach task to an event, right? This is the way you can create alerts to specific events in Active Directory. Now, what's the problem with this process? The problem with this process is that you can only create alerts based on event IDs, right? For example, a logon event ID 4624. And then you can assign a program to the alert, you can send an email based on the alert, and etc. The problem is the limited amount of filtering for the alerts, right? Just a single event ID is not good enough for you to filter the noise that is in the event viewer. That's where AD Audit Plus bridges the gap. So if I head into AD Audit Plus and configuration and create alert profile, do you see the filtering options or the customization options for the alerts here? So you can filter based on a threshold. You can filter based on business hours. For example, if there's a group membership change outside of business hours, you can set up an alert. You can filter based on usernames, based on attributes, based on your computer objects, your groups, etc. You can alert the authorized users, and you can also execute a script. Now, what does the script do? The script essentially functions as a remedial action, right? For example, let's say there is a password spray attack on your domain, and you have an alert that alerts you on the password spray attack, right? And the execute script function right here you can basically configure a script here to counter an alert or to remediate a generated alert, right? So if there is a password spray attack on the domain, you can catch the user who's performing the password spray attack, and you can disable that user's account. Or you could even disable the victim user's account that's being brute forced into or that's being attacked. If there's a group membership change that's happening outside of business hours, you could set up a script that will basically disable the member who was added to the group until the next day when you can come back to the office and check if the group membership change was authentic or not, right? So you can execute scripts right here, totally up to you, based on which your alerts can also perform counteractions based on the changes that are occurring on your network, right? The next thing I want to talk about was group policy management and settings changes. And this brings me back to my older attack that I just showed you. Do you remember this attack where we were able to add a backdoor user to an Active Directory group, right? This application that I just showed you. Here we go, right? Now this attack happened because of a group policy setting on the domain, right? So if I open this up, if I open up my PowerShell, now let me quickly minimize this. And if I open up my group policies, all right, and this is my Windows components inside my user configuration of my default domain policy. I'm going to head into something called Windows Installer. And do you see this option called Always Install with Elevated Privileges? This option, when enabled on your domain, will give your users the right to install Windows Installer or MSI applications with local admin or system admin privileges, right? This unfortunately was enabled on the domain, and that's how a user was able to log on and install an MSI application to add a backdoor user, right? Again, the reason I'm showing you these misconfigurations is to just let you know that this is how misconfigurations lead to security breaches. A simple group policy misconfiguration where always install using elevated was enabled allowed an end user to install an MSI application and add a backdoor member to an Active Directory group. If the group policy setting was disabled, when the user tried to run this application, he or she would have been prompted for admin credentials because, hey, it's not normal for a user to simply make a backdoor change to an Active Directory group, right? Similarly, group policies have a lot of things happening in them. For example, if I open up my group policies right here, users, this is a very common scenario that I've seen in many organizations. End users generally have privileges, groups generally have privileges that they are not supposed to have on the group policies. They have privileges to edit group policy settings, delete or modify settings. Generally, there's a group here whose membership is not monitored, and that group has modify settings on the default domain policy or any other group policy on the domain. There is a random user here who's not allowed to have certain privileges on the group policies, but then he does, right? So group policies that are created, that are deleted, permission changes on group policies are something that you must monitor as well. And of course, there are other ways users can receive privileges on your domain. For example, if I right click on my default domain policy and I hit edit, and if I quickly jump into my user configuration, I'm sorry, computer configuration, policies, Windows settings, and security settings, and you will find something called local policies and user rights assignment right here. Oops, here you go, right? So this is where users can have privileges on the domain via group policies. For example, the privilege to log on through remote desktop services, right? The privilege to back up files and directories by overriding admin privileges, right? This is used for a backup functionality or for a backup feature. But here's my question. How do you know if a user here is using that privilege to actually back up files and folders or to steal data? Right? If I head down, you will find something called take ownership of files and folders that will allow a user to basically lock out the actual owner of a file or folder and take ownership of that file or folder, any file or folder on your domain. You can allow your users to force shut down systems in the organization from a remote system. And there's a lot more that could happen via group policies where end users are given privileges that they are not supposed to have, right? So that's when AD Audit Plus bridges the gap because AD Audit Plus has the ability to monitor group policy changes in real time. So whenever there are settings changes, whenever there are permission changes where an end user is delegated privileges on a group policy, whenever group policies are created, deleted, modified, whenever a group policy is linked or unlinked, you will automatically notice all those changes via these reports. And of course, needless to say, you can configure alerts as well, right? The next thing I wanted to look into is user object attribute values, which brings me to my next point. Do you remember the attack that we performed at the beginning of the authorization phase, where an end user was able to inject backdoor changes into Active Directory? And I told you the root cause for that attack was the replicating directory changes privileges. Now you can detect this attack on your environment by monitoring your endpoints for attribute level changes. This is why monitoring security attribute values on your security objects in your Active Directory environment is absolutely crucial. So whenever an endpoint machine is promoted as a rogue domain controller, the endpoint machine typically has an SPN value or a service principal name value assigned to it, right? And whenever the endpoint machine is unregistered or depromoted or unpromoted as the rogue domain controller, the service principal name value will automatically be removed, right? So if you find your endpoints in your organization, like you can see here, Abhilash is my client system. If you find your endpoints in your organization like this, uh, getting service, having service principal names assigned to them, then leverage AD Audit Plus to monitor such changes, set up alerts, and ensure that only authorized machines are promoted as domain controllers and not any random endpoint, right? So like that, there are many other attributes that you must look into. For example, if I open up my VM right here, open up my ADUC console. This is a pretty straightforward example. This is something you know already, but just to show you, if I right click on this, head into properties and head into the account, right? Here are many opportunities for attributes to be misconfigured. A user may have a password never expires attribute set. A user may have unlimited log on us, like Jen has right here. A user may be allowed to log on to another domain controller or a privileged server. Similarly, your groups, your OUs, your computer objects. Every object has certain attribute values that you must monitor for changes, right? These could help you prevent attacks, and these could also help you detect attacks on your domain. So monitoring security objects changes on an attribute level is very important, and we help you do that as well, right? You see this called user attribute new or old value. So these reports basically help you monitor for attribute level changes on your user objects, where you get to know what the new attribute is, you get to know what the older attribute is, right? So here you go, here's the new value. Similarly, for your groups, for your computers, for your OUs, you can monitor changes on an attribute level. This is extremely useful for you to strengthen security, maintain uniformity, and not just that, detect attacks like the rogue domain controller attack on your environment. The last use case I have here is data modification on your storage devices. Now, you may have Windows file servers, you may have NetApp, you may have EMC. So in an Active Directory or an Azure environment, monitoring data is also equally important. We've only spoken about monitoring our endpoints. We only spoke about monitoring Active Directory, but we have to monitor our data. Data is the gold that is in our files and folders, and essentially that's what attackers are after. And Log360 can help you monitor changes on your data as well, right? So whenever there are changes, whenever there are files that are created, modified, deleted, whenever there are permission changes on a file or folder, whenever there's an owner of a file or folder that was changed, Log360 will detect those changes. And you can basically audit those changes using the file audit tab in ED right? We support all the latest, all the widely used file servers in organizations, and we keep adding more and more support as well. So do leverage this tab to truly monitor file or folder or data-based changes across your data storage devices, namely your file servers in your organization, right? All of these changes you can go back in time, you can check changes across file servers in multiple domains, you can look through the changes, you can search for the user and what the change is, you can understand the location of the file or folder and understand why the user made the change. You can of course set up alerts as well, right? So what about Azure? Because the only use case we've looked into Azure so far was pass the hash attack, right? Or basically the authentication mechanisms that are used to sync AD users to Azure. Now, Azure also has its own limitations that come with it. And before we head into it, it's important that we understand how auditing works in Azure. Now, Azure auditing basically works this way. This is my Azure console. If I head into this, and do you notice your audit logs? This is where all security changes on your Azure objects will be recorded, right? These are your sign-in logs, where basically your log on and log off activities in your Azure environment are recorded, right? We also have a separate unified audit log that records changes in all other services, like your Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, including Azure, right? So Azure logs are recorded in two separate locations, sign-in log, audit log, and also in the unified audit log, which can be accessed from the Office 365 Protection and Compliance Center, right? These logs, I'm not going to lie, are a little better than native Active Directory logs because they give you the filtering that you actually need that the native logs don't do. But then these logs have their own limitations with them. Let me show you a simple example right here. If I want to see any roles that were assigned to my users on the domain, here's what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to select core directory. I'm going to hit apply. And I'm going to select category to say role management, right? So I want to see if my end users have been granted certain roles in Azure AD. So here we go. We know which user had been granted the role. We know which user performed the role grant on this particular target user, and what is the name of the role. Well, that information is not really available, and the only way you can get hold of that information is to click and look through all the information right here to truly understand what the role is that was assigned to your users, right? So this is what I mean. Although Azure can filter better than AD, the problem of clicking through events and truly and understanding what's happened has not really gone down. You still have to click, 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 check the tabs to truly understand what's happening. And that's where AD Audit Plus component of Log 360 bridges the gap. Because if I head into Azure and let's say I head into uh, group management, right? So whenever, we were looking into role management, right? So here we go, role management. So whenever members are added to roles, you can monitor those changes right here. And what's next? You can search based on a role, right? So if I want to see which of my users are security administrators on the domain, all I got to do is type in security, and here we go. Here is all the information that I need right in front of me. This kind of searching capabilities, the native audit tools in Azure AD do not offer, right? Neither do the Office 365 Unified Logs. If I have to monitor the role changes using the Office 365 Unified Logs, all the information is in, let me quickly refresh this, log back in and show it to you. Okay, just gonna re-enter my password. Right, here we go, log in, cancel. Right. So all the information is in JSON format, right? It's again not easy to search. The key aspect of any auditing environment is to get a bird's eye view on the security changes, and that's not possible using any of the native tools. You have to export all of these JSON events that you see right here uh, as an Excel file, and then you'll have to use the Excel file to pass through all the JSON data and understand a simple activity like a role change, right? What's next? More attacks like how we saw in Active Directory can also be performed in Azure AD environments. A user who is an on-premise user can launch a password spray attack on Azure users as well, right? The on-premise auditing troubles repeat for Azure. Although Azure is better, there are still certain problems. For example, there is no bird's eye view. For example, the role change activity that I just showed you. Azure audit tools cannot filter the logs that well. And number three, Azure logs, the logs that you see right here are only retained for 7 days if you have a free license and 30 days if you have a paid license. If you need logs for more than 30 days, you cannot get them. Let's say you need to look into logs that occurred 2 months ago and you need to see them for compliance purposes or for threat hunting purposes. You cannot do so because the maximum archival time for the logs is 30 days. Right now, there is an option where you can send all of these logs to a storage account within Azure where you can store the logs. But then again, it will burn a hole in your pocket because storage accounts, they work on the basis of they work on the pay as you go license model. So when you want to send all the logs that you see in Azure to your storage accounts, the more logs you send, the more money you have to spend because logs occupy a lot of space in the storage account. Right? That's when Log 360 can solve the problem for you because Log 360 can also archive logs and bring back archive logs. You see these options right here? So you can archive certain events in Azure, in AD, and you can bring back the archived events as well if need be. There's a lot more the reports here can do. For example, users, whenever they're created, deleted, changed, you have reports, you have your user logon reports, right? That not just look into Azure logons, but also look into your on-premise logons. In most organizations, the case is on-premise users are synced to Azure Active Directory, right? So when they are synced, it's important that you have insight on AD logons and in Azure logons. Using the native tools, you have to check through the event viewer and you'll have to look through the Azure audit logs. But AD Audit Plus right here can monitor your logons that are occurring in on-prem and in Azure, all from this one pane of glass. Right? So there's a lot more the reports here can do. I would encourage you to check them out, explore through them, and truly understand what's happening where. And one last use case before I end this session was a very relevant attack scenario that's happening around in Azure environments, and that is consent to applications. Right? So what's happening in Azure environments right now is that attackers are creating applications. So if I head into app registrations and let's say I select an application, right? Let's say I head into API permissions. And if I grant admin consent to this application on behalf of the admin can access everything the admin user can. And this is what attackers are doing. They are creating backdoor applications in Azure, and they are giving those applications admin consent, right? So the application on behalf of the attacker could do the attacker's job. This most often starts via phishing emails, where a user is prompted to update something that he or she has received over his or her email. And once the user is asked to update or verify, a consent box opens up. And once the user grants consent, the malicious application can access Azure AD business data on behalf of the user, right? So AD Audit Plus can help you audit application consent as well. So if I head into application management, you see this. Whenever consent is granted to applications by a user, by an administrator, AD Audit Plus can capture this, where you actually know what the name of the application is, which user has granted the consent, what time did it happen, right? And what can the application access in your Azure environment, right? So that is about it for today. Log 360, a single console for AD and for Azure AD security, right? So today we mostly looked into one component of Log 360, and that is AD Audit Plus. So if I log into Log 360, all right. So we looked into the AD Audit Plus component of Log 360, but in the forthcoming sessions, we will cover other components as well. For example, we have a component called the Event Log Analyzer. That is a SIM solution that can be used for detecting advanced attacks in your network that AD Audit Plus cannot. AD Audit Plus is very useful to detect out of the box attacks or instant and give you instant reports, but sometimes when you need to pass through the logs, when you need to peruse through the logs and truly understand what's happened where, that's when a SIM solution like Event Log Analyzer will come into handy. And this solution we will look into in the upcoming sessions as well, right? So do stay tuned for tomorrow's session where we will take a look at 10 simple must audit events in AD in Azure that could lead to a security breach, right? Just 10 events. It won't be as long as today's session where we will cover in depth how these events, if not audited in time and if not caught in time, could lead to a security breach, right? And for those of you who are concerned about Azure, who want to learn more about Azure-based security, I have a webinar that's happening very soon on the March 30th. So you can jump on this webinar and you can learn everything you need to know to secure your Azure infrastructure in your AD environments or just an individual Azure tenant as well. I will leave a link to this webinar right in the chat window. So you could take a look at it. And if Azure security is something you're concerned about, do register for the webinar. I've left the link for it in the chat window, right? So before I end today's session, guys, please do bear with me because I will be launching a quick poll. Now you will find a question flash across your screen. If you can help me out with the answers to the question, that would be very, very helpful. Just a minute more, not more than that. And I promise I will be out of your hair, guys. Thank you so much for your responses. Much appreciated. Just one more minute, guys. I promise I will be out of your hair. Thank you, Matt. I hope you liked it. Thank you, Stefan. Please do hold on, guys. I would love to hear your feedback. Just a few seconds of your time. So much for your responses. I would love to hear your thoughts, guys. Please do let me know your thoughts on how you like today's session. If there's anything different, if there's anything else you would like for me to cover, please do let me know, and I will ensure I implement it in my upcoming sessions. I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for your responses. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Guys, for all of you who've been asking me for the slide deck or for the recording, please do bear with me. On the last day, that's day after, we will be converting all the recordings into a YouTube playlist, and we will ensure that they are shared to all of you. And in the meantime, if you need the slide deck, please do drop me an email, and I'd be more than happy to share that with you. Perfect. So this has been grand. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention. Just 2 more days of sessions. Please do turn up for them. And I hope you have been finding these sessions informative. And the slide decks, I will ensure that they are converted into a YouTube link as soon as possible. And they are shared with all of you at the earliest. And for the slide deck, just shoot me an email and I'll be more than happy to share it with you right now. All right. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. I hope you found the session informative, and I hope to see you soon tomorrow. Thank you. Bye bye. Have a wonderful rest of your day.